You're listening to Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein. This conversation is about how to explain politics and civics to your kids, plus verifying information online with political reporter Ben Margiott. He's also host of the podcast Ballot Battleground Nevada. Ben, as a political reporter who lives and breathes politics and all this stuff, is your head spinning? Because I feel like every time I turn on the TV or open any new social media app, there's always a new headline.
Yeah. And
How
it's
are you
not
hanging
just
in there?
it's just not just the news of the day. We've had multiple world altering, US political altering events, earth-shifting events in the political scene just in the last couple of weeks, certainly in the last month. You're talking about the assassination attempt on former President Trump, the RNC picking JD Vance, Biden dropping out, Democrats circling around Kamala Harris. It's been unbelievable. That doesn't even include earlier this year when Trump was convicted. I mean, it's just been absolutely mind-boggling to try and wrap our heads around all of this happening all at once. But it's been fun. I mean, this is why I love what I do.
You know, it's interesting. I just, admittedly, I'm not somebody who has an insatiable appetite for politics. But right now, and I think that's sort of the sentiment for a lot of people, is you just like, on one hand, it's like, okay, please stop with the rhetoric and all the negativity. But on the other hand, it's like you just can't get enough information. It's like this insatiable appetite to
Yeah.
learn more, to know more. I'm curious how you got so interested in politics that this became your career.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it probably started back in high school taking AP US history and AP world history. And then I think it was government senior year. And I just love those classes. I actually had a really great AP US government teacher that just kind of sparked this love of paying attention to our government and how politics works. And kind of was interested in journalism, of course, went to journalism school and the sports route. I wanted to cover sports for a little while, didn't enjoy that as much after some time, and really found a true passion and calling, I think, for covering news. And it just so happened that in 2016, when I was getting ready to graduate, I was in Arizona at Arizona State, and not quite a full-on swing state yet at the time, but we were getting a lot of visits from presidential contenders, and I got to cover my first political rally, and it was Senator Ted Cruz, who was running for president in that chaotic, crazy 2016 Republican primary, and got to be at one of his events. And I don't know, just something about the energy of covering a political rally was something that I enjoyed, and I love being able to question politicians, to hold them to account. And I got the chance to interview a couple politicians, and I just fell in love with it there. I got the job at News 4 here in Reno later that year, and our longtime, very experienced, well-respected legislative reporter retired, a month before the legislative session, I think. And there was a morning meeting, and who wants to go cover the state legislature down in Carson City? And I'm, 21, 22 years old, fresh out of college, and I just raised my hand in the meeting, and all right, sure enough, Ben's going down to Carson City, and kind of the rest is history. So I love it.
Was there a big competition for going down to Carson City?
There usually isn't. I mean, you've been in newsrooms, it can be the short end of the stick, but
Sure can be.
So news directors love it when there's a reporter that's eager to get down and cover politics. And that has kind of been my jam ever since then.
I love it, because the reality is political decisions impact almost everything. I mean, our daily lives in so many ways, whether it's the simplicity of making sure roads are maintained so they're safe to drive on, or your food is safe to eat. I mean, that's just sort of some everyday examples. Obviously,
Yeah.
there are big examples that are happening in the political discussion today. But, why do you think it's important in particular for our kids to understand this connection between government and political decisions and, the things that they probably, like many of us, kind of take for granted every day?
Certainly. I mean, the connection, every single part of your life is connected in some way to a decision that a government at some level, whether it be federal, state, or local, has made at some point. Clean drinking water, food safety and quality, the safety of the world, obviously, when you look at wars and how the U.S. is a player on the world stage. and locally. I always say that government closest to the people has the most impact on your daily life, how far your new school in your neighborhood is built, whether or not the roads are safe for you to walk and bike on. And so there is just this unbelievable connection to every aspect of our lives. Sometimes I think I can sometimes be guilty of this. Certainly, the national media are guilty of portraying politics as a horse race, a competition, as a battle. And the name of my podcast is Ballot Battlegrounds. I'm really guilty of this at sometimes too, when really it's our job as journalists to explain and make it real, make these policies real for people. Because yes, of course, it is interesting to follow the back and forth and the polls and who's up and who's going to win and who's going to lose. And it's this contest or competition when really the impetus should be on us to explain to our viewers, but also our kids, how it's going to impact your everyday life for forever.
Well, and you have a little one who is absolutely adorable, little boy. Have you envisioned, I mean, he's little, right? Like around 2 years old. So, but have
Yeah, just
you
turned 2.
envisioned, what teaching him about these things would look like? And what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's honestly great time to be on this podcast because now that he's just turned 2, his vocabulary is expanding exponentially every single day. And obviously, he's not paying attention to the news yet. He knows the word news because his dad is on the news and his mom works for the news. But he's not really paying attention yet. But I'm so glad you brought me on this podcast because it started to get the wheels turning in my head of, okay, now that he's learning language and going to start to pick up on things over the next year, 2 years, definitely by the time he's in kindergarten, he's going to be aware of the events that are happening in the world. How do we want to have a household that talks about these matters in a respectful way, finding the balance between talking about politics too much in the home, but you also want your children to kind of grow up with your perspective and your worldview to some extent. So it's a fine line, and really excited to start thinking about that. Me and my wife had the first conversation since you invited me on this podcast, and how do we want to think about that? Yeah, it's a little bit too early for us, but I'm curious how you talk about politics in your home with older children, right? A middle schooler and a high schooler.
We do. I will say, spending the vast majority of my career in journalism, we were very conscientious of not sharing, or I was, my political affiliation, really encouraging them to make their own decisions. Part of that, just again, to the idea of being impartial as a journalist, worried that they would go to a friend's house and says, well, my mom is going to vote for whatever. And I
Right,
really
right.
I've always taken that incredibly seriously as a journalist. So, our conversations now are really about, well, where did you find that information? Well, what do you think about it? Kind of turning it around and talking about the importance of just being educated in this space and not just believing something on the surface, like trust but verify, which is something that
Sure. Yeah.
we say quite often in the news. But
I almost
yeah,
think
so
there's
it's kind of a delicate dance, right?
yeah, I almost think there's kind of a mentality of, and we're trained in this as journalists, talking about politics around your children as if you were, um, you want to let your guard down, of course, and tell them your feelings to some extent,
Of
but you want to
course.
present to them the most objective, fact based accounting of the events of the day, of politics, of news, so that they can kind of form their own opinions. That's the mission that we do on the news every single night. And there's a lot of parallels in probably trying to have that same exact mentality at home. Now, obviously, it's your kids, you're at home, you can let your guard down a little bit. You don't have to be
Totally.
full on news anchor voice, but to present the information in the same way to them, give them the tools to be able to research their own sources, trust but verify, as you say, to find out information and research these issues on their own, to empower them to kind of think critically and come to conclusions on their own, I think is a really special thing. We haven't, as I said, my son just barely turned 2, so he's not there yet, but I hope and imagine and look forward to that being kind of the mentality in our household.
Yeah, and I will say as my kids have gotten older, particularly like I have a 16, almost she'll be 17 in the fall. And then I have a middle schooler. Like as they're older, we have a little bit more open, frank conversations about why we may feel this way or that way. But again, really kind of putting it back on them to make their own decisions. One of the things too, just working as a reporter, particularly as a political reporter, is this idea, this skill to break down really complex,
Mm,
sometimes
yeah.
quite boring.
Yeah. Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
let's be real.
You're preaching to the
Um,
choir here.
messaging and ideas and complex, ideas to break it down into like bite size, easy to digest information. So, like, what are some of the ways that you can do that, or you might do that when you're talking about government or some of the issues that are at the forefront today?
Yeah, well, the formal education, at least for me, it started, I think, freshman year of high. You would know better than me. Freshman year of high school is like your first official history and
Y-
government class, right?
Yeah, sure.
But I mean, I really think that education should start in the home and sooner than that, because as in middle school and probably even at the end of elementary school, they're starting to see what's happening on the news and wondering maybe how the government works. And as you say, just making it very simple. These are the three branches of government. We put so much focus on the presidential race and especially Congress, but there's the judicial branch. What does the Supreme Court do? And really open it up for them. Ask questions. What do you want to know? How does this policy make you feel? How does this policy affect certain people? What are you hearing about it from your friends at school, or
Mm,
your friends, your parents? Yeah, the parents of your friends, and really just turning it back on them to kind of hear what they're hearing and the information that they've kind of collected to kind of understand a little bit about their worldview. And again, yeah, simplifying it down to the basics on this is how the executive branch can affect your life. They have to work together with the legislative branch and the judicial branch, and kind of making it so that when they get to that first government class, that history class, they already have a base of information to go off of. Oh, my mom and dad talked about this when I was a little kid.
right. They're not starting flat footed. Like they have a basic understanding of it. And look, like the reality is if parents haven't done that yet, it's not too late, right? Like
No, yeah.
politics and understanding government is not for everybody. However, we are in the middle of a election cycle right now. It is certainly, we know our kids are getting this information from somewhere, if not from home. So, ideally, just incorporating those conversations into our homes will set them up for success.
Yeah.
Just thinking in terms of like civic activities, like what age do you think we should encourage our kids to get involved in civic activities?
Never too young, honestly.
Really?
So
Okay.
one of my favorite parts about being a political reporter, election days are very stressful. You're going all day long, but the best part of my election day is when I see a young person walk into the voting booth. It's a baby or a toddler or a young child with their parents to go vote. I think that's just the most awesome thing, just to expose them to that from a very young age. I was working, I think, when I voted in this last election, so I didn't bring my son. But next time he's coming to the polls with me. And then another great thing is seeing that first time voter, 18, 19, maybe 20 years old, fresh out of high school, or hopefully still in high school, voting for the first time in Nevada. You get a certificate. You get oftentimes the poll workers will take your picture. If I'm there at the polling place,
Cool.
the news comes over and takes your picture. And it's just a really cool moment to kind of impress upon a young voter, a first time voter, how important that is, and to hopefully take that responsibility very seriously for the rest of their lives.
And get those little "I voted" stickers.
Yes, the
Kids
sticker.
hate.
I have a collection every time that I voted since I became, and maybe, hey, this is be a great thing to do for people
Yeah.
too. Collect those I voted stickers because I've lived in a couple different states now. I have several different states and counties of I voted stickers, and it's just cool little piece of memorabilia to have to look back and say, I voted in every single election. Here's the sticker to prove it. And I think it's just, yeah, taking your kids along to go vote when they're 16 or 17. You can pre-register to them to vote in a lot of states so that as soon as they turn 18, boom, you can go vote in that next election. If it's going to a political rally, of course, those can be very interesting nowadays. I don't know if I'd bring my young child to a political rally, but if you are, take them to rallies for candidates on both sides. And so they can kind of experience, or at least if you're in a state like we are, where we have candidates coming all the time, watch some of their campaign visits on social media so you can kind of expose them to both sides of the aisle and not just the politicians that their parents like.
I do love that idea of the I voted stickers in like a journal or like a page, and then writing down where you were, who you voted for. That's like a pro tip. That'd be kind of fun to look back
Yeah,
on,
I even vote
actually.
on, and I obviously won't tell you who I voted for, but I vote, who was the candidate at the top of the ticket that I voted for in that year. And so that I can kind of, and I write that on the sticker so I can kind of look back and say, okay, this is kind of how I was feeling as a voter and back in 2016 and my first
Yeah.
elect or 2014, my first election. So it's kind of a cool thing to look back on and could be a fun thing to do with your kids
You
or
know what? I
not
haven't
kids,
thought about this.
teenagers and young
Yeah.
adults.
Well, speaking of the teenager, like, I have a 16-year-old, and it wasn't that long ago, we were unpacking a box that I don't know why we still had it packed. It was her baby book was in there, and I realized in 2008, I put the I voted sticker in her baby book because it was the first election, like, I took her to at the
That's
time.
awesome. What a
Yeah.
cool memory that you
So
guys now have.
yeah, it was she was like she would have been, had just turned 1 in
Okay.
2000, fall of 2008. But anyway, and then that's of course dating myself probably a little bit, but neither here nor there. You know what I want to talk about too is just the current events and media literacy in particular. There
Yeah.
is, look, no secret, there is so much misinformation out there right
Yeah.
now. It is mind boggling often. It's right in the palm of our hands, in our kids' hands.
Mhm.
So, how would you explain the concept of misinformation?
Yeah, I would start from a place of if you are on social media, and I don't know if your kids are, I imagine they are because they're in middle school and high school, everyone is. Um, Start from a place of skepticism. So much of the information that you and we are seeing out there is misinformation, disinformation, misleading if it's not coming from a trusted, verifiable, objective source. And I think from a very young age, as soon as a child has an iPad or an iPhone in their hand and they're seeing information about the world out there, it's probably time to start that conversation
Mm,
because, as we know, misinformation moves at the speed of light, and the wrong information will get in front of their faces before the correct information will, because it's sensationalized or exciting or more, what's the word I'm looking for here? Scary potentially. And so
yeah.
sometimes that misinformation
It's an
spreads
attention
really
getting.
fast. Right. It grabs your attention. It
Yeah.
is juiced by the algorithms that are driving all of these platforms. And so it gets in front of people's eyeballs so much faster than the work that we do as journalists to try and fact check and get the correct proper information out there. So I think it's really just impressing upon them how critical it is to not just see and believe, not believe something just because someone, a talking head on TikTok or Instagram, is saying it, but to go to that person's page, to look them up online, to see who they work for, if they have an employer, if they're doing this as a content creator, what their motivations are, what their biases are, why they are doing this, and to really question that. That doesn't necessarily mean that everything that you see from an influencer or from a certain source that's not the news is invalid. I'm not saying that, but just to keep that in the back of your mind as you're seeing sources that you might be questioning and should be questioning. Some of the information might be coming from a place of they're trying to do activism as opposed to reporting. And we just have to keep that in the back of our heads.
Yeah, that's great advice. My son is not on any social media right now, thank goodness, not interested, at least at the
Yeah.
moment. I'm sure that day comes. But, my 16-year-old has Instagram and TikTok. And while we spot check it every now and then, the reality is I have no idea what is showing up
Yeah.
on her feeds right now. Now, she's not like real hot into politics, so I'm not sure the algorithm is feeding her that, but just being conscientious that she very well could run into those
Yeah.
messages that just are not
And all it,
based in fact.
Yeah, and all it takes is really the algorithms are paying attention to our attention so closely that all it takes is really, say on TikTok, watching a video for 10 seconds too long and the algorithm realized, oh, they were interested in that, and they
Yes.
slowly start to mix it into your For You page, and you start seeing similar videos, and it can really kind of draw you in very quickly. So it really doesn't take much.
Yeah, you're so right. I think just curious of your own process. How do you, as a political reporter in this climate, sort through those things as well? Because, of course, this is important for our middle schoolers and
Yeah.
teenagers who are being fed this sort of when we may or may not have our eyes on it, but it's important for us as adults who are consuming it and parents who are consuming this information too. So, just curious about your process as a journalist in these times, how you navigate that fact from fiction and the misinformation that it seems to be on so many platforms.
Yeah, especially as a reporter who has seen so much of this bad information out there for years now, I'm a cynic, so I am skeptical of everything that I see until I have been able to verify it and go down the rabbit hole to make sure that it's legitimate. That doesn't mean that I'm occasionally, and my brain is tricked into thinking, oh, that's legit. And okay, I have to do my research, even if it's just something unrelated. There's misinformation out there having to deal with sports. And I'll give you an example. It's kind of unrelated, but there was a sports highlight that yesterday that I saw, and it was not true. It was from a couple of years ago, but it tricked my brain and I didn't even look at it because I was kind of off guard because it was about sports. And I don't know, it's just a good lesson for me that even if it's something innocuous like a sports highlight, this wasn't malicious or anything, or it wasn't a bad actor. It was just a joke, but you really do need to be kind of on guard at all times.
Yeah, sure. Verify,
Yeah.
verify.
If your mother
That
says she
is.
loves you, check it out. That's the phrase from
Do you know?
journalism
I was
school.
literally going to say
Yeah.
that again.
If your mother says she loves you, check it out.
It's so funny. I went to the University of Missouri J school there many years ago. That we
Great
use that
journalism
line
program.
there, huh?
Yeah. Great journalism program. So
It
yeah.
sure is. It sure is. Yeah, but it's funny that was a line we used as well. So, if your mom tells you she loves you, check that out.
Yeah.
Um, Ben, this is so
But not
much
your
fun.
kids. But
I'm
not your
sorry.
kids. I was just going to say, but not your kids.
No, they know.
Yeah, they don't need to check it out.
They
They
know.
know.
They tell me to back off. Anyway, Ben, this is so much fun. I am so grateful that you were able to join us. If there was one takeaway for us parents when it comes to these conversations that really are important to be having with our kids right now, what would that be?
I don't even know if it's a takeaway about how to have conversations with your kid, but be mindful and cognizant, conscientious of the conversations that you might have
Mm,
with your spouse, with your other family members at family gatherings. They are so impressionable. Even my son is 2, and he's picking up on things that me and my wife are talking about. So we already have to be on guard about that. They feed off of our energy so much. And so if politics are a huge stressor in your home, because let's be honest, the events of the world can be stressful. There's a war in Gaza. There was someone that tried to assassinate the president. I mean, these are stressful, heavy, difficult topics to talk about. But if they become over consuming or all consuming in your home among parents, that can obviously rub off on your children and make them kind of feel that energy too. So it's just being mindful of that, and also having respectful dialogues about politics in the home. If parents agree on a topic, there's probably not going to be very many debates about politics inside the home. But certainly if parents, and we know this, families disagree about politics all the time, family gatherings. And so trying to have those in a respectful, responsible manner, that we're not yelling and screaming at each other about politics, and really modeling for them how to have good dialogues about the issues that are focused on the issues, that are refraining from personal attacks and things like that. And so you got to kind of be, and this is parenthood, right? It's no matter the topic, you got to be always conscientious of every single little thing that you do or say can be picked up on by your kids.
And it is, I will
Yeah.
say. Ben, thank you so much. Such great information. And really thank you for the work that you're doing right now to help everybody stay informed. Really appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me on. This has been a pleasure.
I really enjoyed talking with Ben. And look, I'm going to just admit right here, like, politics has never been my thing. Not that I didn't really care. It's just more that, I don't know, just complex. I'd figure out who I'm voting for, and that was kind of the end of it. But as I get older, oh my gosh, that has really changed. Right now in particular, I just have an insatiable appetite for it, especially leading up to the presidential election. And what I've come to realize in a takeaway from that conversation with Ben, one thing he said was his job as a reporter is to explain and make these policies real for people. But just switch out reporter for parent, right? And our job as our children get older and more aware of the world around them is to help them understand, help make these policies and these politics real or relatable and understandable for our kids. It's not just the quote unquote, battle between two or more people. It's what do you want your roads to be like? Schools to look like? It's policies that shape, how clean our water is. So much of our everyday lives. So I really do want my kids to grow up with a deeper understanding of the importance of how their vote can help shape their lives. Thank you so much for listening to Raising Me. I'm Adrienne Stein. This episode is edited by Megan Littlefield and produced with Nate Eldridge. Please follow Raising Me wherever you get your podcasts, and give us a like and share to a friend, say, maybe to your social pages too, so others can find this message as well. Wherever you are, I hope you learned something new and get to take a little time for you.